what I started to realize is that from their perspective, the United States has, from their perspective, they've had an open hand toward us for years, and we've kind of slapped it away. And granted, they've done terrible things, and as have we, but they wanted to join NATO at one point. We said no. During the reunification of Germany deal, part of the deal was that NATO wouldn't expand eastward. We said yes, and then we lied, and we added a few countries into the NATO bloc, which they feel like is threatening their borders. The line that they drew essentially was Ukraine, and there's a lot of countries that I'm leaving out just because I have a terrible memory today. But from their perspective, like they've always been like, we want to be your friends, or we feel like we want to be your friends, but you guys always have us as an enemy. And Ukraine, as they started to draw closer to the West, to me, the way I looked at it is if China wanted to build a base in Mexico, we wouldn't let it happen. And I feel like that's my perspective of it. That's my understanding of it. And I'm curious to get your thoughts as to if I'm way off base or if I'm getting close to hitting a home run here.
Yeah, I think this is very close to home run, but I can say this is more precisely, it will be a similar situation when to Canada and the US.
Yeah.
Because of close historical ties, not only just geographic location, but very close historical and ties. So they used to be one country, and like Canada and the United States, basically before independence, US independence. But in terms of history, before they became independent, but and Canada would be a kind of very similar kind of relationship as Ukraine to Russia.
Okay.
So as Canada to the United States, and I mentioned this also in my interviews, and this is also important because I research, another area of my research is United States and Canada, comparing US and Canada. So this is kind of also related, and I can say this is an important issue about actually Russian invasion, because obviously this is illegal invasion. It's not justified by any kind of pretext which was given by Putin in invading Ukraine. It was illegal under international law, and claims by Putin that Ukraine is going to become member of NATO in the near future, would become a base for military missiles or weapons from the West. Were not supported by any evidence. I do not think that there was likely that Ukraine had any chances of becoming NATO member in the foreseeable future, in part because NATO did not want to have any conflict with Russia or war with Russia, and that's why they oppose even now membership of Ukraine, because this would mean war with nuclear Russia. And also there were no Nazis in the Ukrainian government, so claimed by Putin that this is denazification is also kind of based on misrepresentation, and his claim that there is a genocide of Russians or ethnic Russian speakers or ethnic Russians or Russian speakers in Ukraine, in Donbass, also is not supported by evidence. And this is, I wrote about this in my studies and I talked about this publicly. So there was no such justification for Russian invasion. But this does not mean that Russia did not regard Ukraine as a kind of as possibly a military threat and political threat to Russia, as similarly what happened kind of with Caribbean missile crisis when when the Soviet Union used Cuba to deploy nuclear weapons. So they believe there was such possibility. So they claim this as also justification for this invasion, because this can happen in the future. So they believe this might happen, and also they say that this is Ukraine basically was used as a tool against Russia, and now when the United States basically uses Ukraine and other Western countries use Ukraine as to wage a proxy war with Russia. So this is actually Russian government says basically this is what they wanted. They were concerned about, because this is like testimony that their claims that the West is only interested in using Ukraine as a tool against Russia is now kind of backed by a policy of the US, by giving weapons, basically by using Ukraine to fight Russia without actually deploying US military or NATO military forces in Ukraine, but giving weapons and giving like intelligence and other support, money basically for the government and so on. So that's why I think kind of pretext for invasion was illegal, and invasion was illegal, but this does not mean that there was no way to avoid this. It was possible to avoid this war between Russia and Ukraine, and I mentioned specifically in my interviews and in my publications before this war was launched by Russia, I said that there was such possibility, for instance, by Ukraine becoming neutral country. So there was no possibility of NATO membership of Ukraine, even so such membership was mentioned as a possibility by NATO in 2008. But this means it was very easy for Ukraine to abandon this goal of NATO membership and become a neutral country and accept kind of Minsk agreement to accept basically autonomy of Donbass, and this would mean that this would basically mean that Russia would no longer have any pretext for invasion of Ukraine and would accept this in order to prevent such a war between Russia and Ukraine from a Russian invasion of Ukraine. And also I said that in exchange for this, Ukraine could be offered a prospect of becoming a member of the European Union in the future if it would fulfill all the criteria like democracy and human rights and so on. But unfortunately, this did not happen, and now I think it will be very difficult to have a peaceful resolution to this conflict, because now this war is going for a long time and there are a lot of casualties in Ukraine, devastation to Ukraine, and if the war would continue, it would have even much more negative impact on Ukraine, and I don't think that a peaceful resolution is now very likely unless there would be any significant change in the military outcome of this war.
We're getting to a point where too much blood is being shed, but I do want to push back on something. You did mention that there was no evidence for like a genocide towards Russian speakers in, I believe, the Donbass region, correct?
Yes.
But I am curious because it's my understanding that there were laws passed to kind of get rid of the Russian language, right? Which could be a bit of an aggressor. Language is very, very important. Your home country of Canada, they have laws in Quebec that it's illegal, I believe, to not teach French. So that's a very, very important language. Is very, very important. The second thing I want to know is there any credence to the Russian claims that Ukraine was shelling Donbass? Because there was, I believe, a separatist movement, and then also it's like a 3-part question. How deep is this separatist movement in those regions, Donbass and Luhansk? Is it as widespread as the Russian propaganda machine wants to make it, or is it as faint as the West? It's probably somewhere in the middle, but I'm kind of curious. So just kind of to reiterate it, was Donbass shelled by the Ukrainian government? Were there laws passed against Russian language speakers, and how deep is this so-called separatist movement, or is there one?
Yes, I researched all these issues, and I can say that there was shelling of Donbass by the Ukrainian forces since 2014, when the civil war started. And this war was started not accidentally, it started in Donbass, because I published my book about regional conflicts and divisions in Ukraine in 2006, before this conflict started, in which I said that there was a real possibility that Ukraine could face a breakup of a country, basically separatist division in Ukraine, in particular by looking to separatist 2 regions in Ukraine, which I identified were Crimea and Donbass. Based on my research, based on public opinion surveys, which show that there was absolute majority support for joining Russia in Crimea. In the 1990s, it became smaller when Yanukovych was elected, but still very significant, and the majority supported joining Russia after the Maidan, when there were laws adopted against Russian language and a new government came to power, which was anti-Russian. So the similar situation happened in Donbass. So in Donbass, I mentioned this separatist, that this was separatist region, significant support for separatism even before Maidan. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, there was a significant support for separatism in Donbass, and in addition to Crimea. And the same happened after the first Maidan in 2004, when also pro-Russian government was basically replaced after they attempted to falsify election results, and they were based in this region. And Yanukovych in particular, was not elected president, and he was actually, and other politicians that supported separatism or autonomy for this region. And after the Maidan happened, I conducted actually a survey I commissioned a survey in Ukraine from a company which is most reputable company, sociological company in Ukraine, Kyiv Institute of International Sociology, International Sociology Institute, and they conducted this survey for my research project, which I published in Washington Post and presented in American Political Science Association conference and published in a book and in as article in peer-reviewed journal, which actually was the most cited article on the civil war in Donbass in Google Scholar. So this is just based on this survey, I can say that there was a significant support, majority support for separatism in Donbass. So, but different forms of separatism. Not all of them supported joining Russia. Some supported independence of Donbass, and many Ukrainians supported autonomy of this region within Ukraine. So this means there was public support for separatism in Donbass. Even so, this was denied by media, by politicians. There was clear evidence that Donbass was the only region in Ukraine, with the exception of Crimea, that had a majority support for separatism in different forms of separatism in this region. All other regions of Ukraine had minority support of separatism. So that's why Donbass, it was not accidental that the war took place. And shelling of Donbass happened, and most active fighting in Donbass happened in 2014 and 2015 between separatists, and most of them were local citizens. I also collected all the data, but there were also Russian volunteers. But in addition to this, they obviously could not match Ukrainian military forces. Ukrainian military came very close to capturing, basically defeating all the separatist forces in summer of 2014. But then Russia deployed covertly their military to Donbass to support separatists. They did not recognize this publicly, but all the evidence suggests that they were Russian military forces. Just few, like several battalions, maybe a few thousand Russian military forces, they were able to, again, push back Ukrainian forces and kill many Ukrainian soldiers and members of paramilitary battalions and far-right-led battalions, and they were able basically to kind of to establish de facto independence of Donbass separatist regions. But they were not recognized by Russia, because Russia still publicly recognized them as a Ukrainian part of Ukraine, but it supported separatists. And after a second attempt by the Ukrainian forces to capture Donbass in 2015, Russia again deployed military forces covertly and was able to encircle Ukrainian forces. And after this, Ukrainian government had to sign Minsk agreements, in which they basically agree under pressure from Russia, military pressure from Russia, after a result of basically defeat from Russia, military defeat, they sign agreement to basically give autonomy to Donbass and de facto independence of Donbass within Ukraine. So basically, Donbass would become a region with their own government, with their own militia, basically their own prosecutor, justice system, and so on, but still nominally within Ukraine. So this was a possible way to resolve this conflict. And Zelensky, when he came to power, he was elected basically on promise of peaceful resolution of this conflict. So he said that he would go to Russia to meet with anybody just to make a peace in Ukraine, and he was elected mostly by people who were from eastern Ukraine, and for southern Ukraine, many of whom were pro-Russian, not actually supporting joining Russia, but they wanted to have better relations with Russia, and they voted to him, and he got elected against the former president Poroshenko, who was very kind of hardline, nationalistic, very kind of belligerent, supporting war with Russia and so on, kind of using all this language. Ukraine, Zelensky was actually opposite. He basically said that it's necessary to respect all languages, Russian language. It's necessary to have peace with Russia. So this actually election was giving hope that the Ukraine might have again possible the resolution of this conflict. And afterwards, there was a meeting between Zelensky and Putin with leaders of France and Germany I think in Paris, in which there was agreement basically to try to defuse this conflict and implement the Minsk agreement, there was a dispute between how to implement this, and basically Zelensky and Putin agreed that there would be a withdrawal of military from front line in order to defuse, to avoid shelling of these forces. It was agreed that Ukrainian forces would be and separatist forces would be withdrawn from their line of basically of combat, and this led to reduction of shelling for 1 year, maybe 2 years. But then Zelensky changed his position. He became again very radical. He started to advocate for military takeover on Donbass, and this happened after he visited Donbass, and far-right or neo-Nazi organization linked to Azov told him basically that they would not leave this region. They threatened him that he would be dismissed from president, or even he would be killed if there would be peace with Russia. So he had to change his policy. He became this kind of new Poroshenko, very kind of anti-Russian, and starting to support not only kind of military takeover of Donbass by force, but also military takeover of again of Crimea, which was annexed by Russia. So this led to intensification of conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and Russia supported separatists, even so there were no separatist military forces in Donbass until 2022, and with the exception of these two short Russian military interventions in 2014 and 2015. And there was increased shelling shortly before the war started, but the shelling of Donbass was not comparable in any form or in scope to what happened in 2014 and 2015. So there was increase in shelling, but there was no evidence that the Ukrainian forces wanted to again capture Donbass or take it back from separatists or from supported by Russia. Even so, the Russian government claims that there was such evidence. There is no such evidence, which I examined, or reliable evidence. And shelling was significant, but it was not comparable to what was before, and no way comparable to what happened after the Russian invasion of Donbass, because now Donbass is the main area of battle between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah, that's. But I mean, just the him going down there, meeting with those people, and then trying to get it back, and then shelling. That's not the best political move, right? If you're trying to make peace, but it's I'm confused by that, right? Like why start doing that? Like does that make sense to you?
Yes, because he basically Zelensky, he's I think what I call him is a weak president. He just plays very strong president because he was elected after he became very popular on Ukrainian television, after the television show in which he played a very kind of strong president, kind of, which he now became basically after or tries to present himself after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, basically supporting ordinary people, becoming very tough again, and so on. So he now this basically the same Zelensky who played such president in this fictional movie, which got him elected as president of Ukraine. But in fact, he was very weak, and even kind of as a leader, because he was elected not only by his own kind of based on his own popularity. He was promoted by oligarch, who was a very powerful oligarch who owned television channel in which this television show was shown. And Zelensky was basically backed by oligarch to presidency of Ukraine. So he was already a kind of client of this oligarch. So he was elected to basically not only again become president, but also to support economic interests of this oligarch who had the problems. And he actually recently even investigated in the United States for corruption. By he bought a lot of property from money from his bank, which he laundered from Ukraine in Cleveland and in Texas. He bought a lot of like factories, buildings, and steel mills and so on in Texas and in Cleveland, in Ohio. And now FBI investigated him. So he was in very hot water, but basically he he supported Zelensky, and Zelensky became his president. But after election, Zelensky became actually more influenced by the United States and also by far right, so who threatened him publicly if he would make a deal with Russia. So he basically caved to such pressure, and that's why he's not a very strong, because if he was a leader of Ukraine, he would just do this, even because he had popular mandate. He had 73% support of Ukrainians, but he basically was threatened, and he felt that it's more dangerous to oppose far right, who could have shot him or just tried to overthrow him. And there was a real possibility of this because they attacked his office. They put a swastika on his office just 1 year ago. This was again kind of they threatened him publicly to harm him in Kiev if he would make a deal with Russia. So this is done openly without any consequences. And basically, police stood by. The police stood by, and so this means few thousand people who have no power, like they are not elected, but they have power basically to overthrow Ukrainian president. And this is why this was very dangerous. And the U.S. government also did not, because U.S. government had very strong influence on Zelensky, and they could tell him basically to try to make a peace deal, but they told him opposite. And when this impeachment happened in the United States, there was a very famous case of a phone call between Donald Trump and Zelensky. Mm-hmm. And what surprised a lot of people actually when this in Ukraine, when this phone call transcript was released, that Zelensky became in his phone call, he was again very kind of deferent to Trump. So he will like say all this kind of trying to please Trump. So this was not like talk between two leaders of countries, but Zelensky was basically trying to do this all this kind of to please Trump by giving him everything like and saying all that he regarded Trump as greatest politician and so on. This is like all this talk, basically kind of trying to be liked by Trump and not to be a kind of a leader and kind of preserve this kind of independence. And that's why kind of this was shock to many people that Zelensky basically was trying basically to kind of to not be a kind of real leader of Ukraine, but was trying to be liked by Trump and basically trying to please him in any way and form. And this is happens the same with Biden. When Biden was elected, so Zelensky tried to please him, and he one way to do this, he also closed opposition television channels because they were supported by a relative Russian party, and so and Zelensky decided to please Biden by giving him present by closing opposition channels which were linked to Russian political party, which was relatively pro-Russian. They not supported Russian invasion, but they advocated closer relations with Russia and peace with Russia, which was considered then again kind of basically a treason. And now this leader of this party is arrested by Zelensky and put in prison. So that's why kind of
any
this is why I'm saying I was telling my students even before this war started, I was saying to my students that Ukrainian politics is more interesting than Hollywood movies.
Yeah,
because imagine this. This is like you watch this, and this is like the reality of this television show.
It's like it's like the reality. So anytime someone has a little bit of common sense, there's like, all right, there's a way we can cut a deal to get us out of here and be free. Someone comes in and kind of fucks it up. Some there's like 17 different, you've got the far right, you got oligarchs, you've got people that are like, well, we kind of like Russia, let's keep them, let's get closer to them, and then also appease the West. You have a president that's weak, that's trying to please everybody, but he's kind of corrupted as well. So you just this is it's almost like the perfect storm of FUBAR, right? It's just it's not good. How